Lately, I've been seeing many people talk about and showcasing an alignment of the Lord's feast from this year, 2024, to 7 years later in 2031, using the exact number of days given in the Bible from Daniel 9:27, where it says he will confirm a covenant for 1 7, which is 7 years. Daniel chapter 12, verse 7, a time, times, and half a time, which is 3.5 years. Daniel chapter 12, verse 11 through 12, 1290 days and 1335 days. Revelation chapter 11, verse 2 through 3, 42 months, 1260 days. Revelation 12:6, 1260 days. Revelation 12:14, a time, times, and half a time, which is again 3.5 years. Revelation 13:5, 42 months, which is 1260 days or 3.5 years. And Revelation 13:5, 42 months, which is 1260 days or 3.5 years. So in all of these Bible verses, we are given a literal exact number of days over here. So we need to follow 2 Timothy 2:15 and study to show thyself approved unto God, and rightly divide the word of truth, because those number of days have to belong to a timeline, and God did not give us those exact number of days for no reason. And I've been seeing a lot of people recently plug in those days into a specific date, and it does align with the Lord's feasts. It just so happens to align from this year to 2031 exactly on the dates of the Lord's feasts. Jesus Christ instructed us to watch. Watch therefore, for ye know not what hour your Lord does come. Watch therefore and pray always, that you may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man. For as a snare shall it come on all of them that dwell on the face of the whole earth. Take heed, watch and pray, for you know not when the time is. And even here in Titus, looking for that blessed hope and the glorious appearing of the great God and our Savior Jesus Christ. So we are instructed to look for that blessed hope, to watch for the glorious appearing of Jesus Christ. And the Lord God will do nothing but reveal his secret unto his servants the prophets. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end, which is right now, it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry. Many people will of course go to Matthew 24:36, but of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. As well as Matthew 25:13, watch therefore. But Jesus is saying watch therefore before he says, you know neither the day nor the hour wherein the Son of Man cometh. So we have to watch for that day and for the hour, because it will come eventually. And since we're given an exact number of days, I believe we could know the day, because with these days, they have to be plugged into a timeline to land on a specific day, which may land on Jesus Christ's coming. So before I get right into showcasing what people have been saying, I'll leave timestamps in the description of the video and just timestamps throughout the video, so the video is divided for you. But basically, when Jesus said no man knows the day or hour in Matthew 24:36, his Jewish audience would likely have recognized this as a familiar phrase tied to the wedding customs they practice. It wasn't just a statement of unpredictability, but also a deep cultural metaphor indicating that just as the bride awaited her groom, we should be awaiting with anticipation for Christ's return. With ancient Jewish wedding culture, after the betrothal, the groom would leave to prepare a place for her, while the bride waited without knowing the exact day or hour of his return. Only the groom's father knew the timing of his return to her, and when the father approved, the groom would return unexpectedly, often announced with a trumpet blast, to take his bride to the wedding feast. And this parallels John chapter 14 verses 1 through 4, where Jesus says, in my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you, I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, that you may be also. So this parallels Jesus' relationship with the church. He has gone to prepare a place for the church, his bride, and only God the Father knows when he will return. So that's why Jesus said, but my Father only knows that day and hour. Now, to make better sense about what I'm about to be talking about next, I recently made a video on the types and shadows of the rapture with the Feast of Tabernacles right here. So if you haven't seen that video, definitely check it out in the description, because it's going to make what I'm going to explain next a lot more sense. But to sum up that video very shortly, Tabernacles is also known as the Feast of Ingathering. It's when the wheat that has been processed, cut, dried, threshed, winnowed, sifted, and ground is gathered into barns or granaries. And the gathering of wheat into barns is a picture of the gathering of believers into the Father's house at the rapture. So Tabernacles is also the last festival of the biblical year, and the last day of Tabernacles is called Shemini Atzeret, which is the 8th day of the solemn assembly. And this last day is referenced by Jesus in John chapter 6 4 times, that the resurrection will occur at the last day, which you could read in those verses. And in the following chapter, the phrase last day is applied to the Feast of Tabernacles, where Jesus said in the last day, that great day of the Feast of Tabernacles, Jesus stood and cried, saying, if any man thirst, let him come unto me and drink. And since Tabernacles is the last festival of the biblical year, the 7th festival of the 7th month, it is when the last trumpet is sounded. And we can read about the last trump over here in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verse 52, which is the rapture verse that is very well known that Paul spoke about. So because of this significance with the Feast of Tabernacles and the rapture, and how there's many shadows and types of it, it's seen as a possible watch time for the rapture. So with that in mind, let's take a look at a significant alignment of the Lord's feast from 2024 to 2031. So many watchmen have been pointing out and eyeing specific dates and also years, because there's a harmonious alignment of days given from the Bible, which I showed earlier, that add up and match up perfectly from 2024 to 2031. And that shouldn't be ignored. Even if it doesn't turn out to be anything, it's better to point out patterns and anyone's findings rather than to keep it to ourselves, just so we're given a warning to everyone just in case something does occur. I've even seen a few comments from people mentioning the same patterns too. So here's a comment from Watch Lady 196, and she says, here's my thought. Shemini Atzeret is the last great day of the harvest, the 8th day, and they blow a shofar. 7 days later is November 1st. Is this our 7-day warning? 7 years from the Revelation 12 sign and the beginning of the 7-year tribulation? I don't know, it's just a thought. Thanks for sharing this info, I love it. Then this next comment is from Joseph Allen. He says, the first 2 books spell in Hebrew Torah, and in a forward motion, right, it spells that exactly every 49 letters. The last 2 books do the same, but in a backwards direction, with Leviticus in the middle, spelling in Hebrew Yahweh every 7 letters. The first 5 books paint a picture like this. So he just gives like a emojis kind of pointing to what it looks like. And he says, if the arrows represent the feast, that would mean he fulfilled the spring forward and will fulfill the fall backwards. If the rapture is indeed during the last great day of the last feast, which is Tabernacles, we now have exactly 2,520 days from the rapture to the second coming at Trumpets 2031. That places the Abomination of Desolation a day before Passover, which makes sense as an aggressive attack to stop the Jews from worshiping. And then here's a comment from Karch, which gives an exact number of days given from the Bible, fitting them in to a timeline, which I'll showcase more about this later on. But as you see, many people have been pointing out specific timelines using the exact number of days from the Bible. So now I'm going to share with you various clips from various Watchmen's videos from their YouTube channels who have all been looking at the same patterns with the same feast alignments. And after I showcase these clips, I'm going to summarize it all and give a hypothetical mock-up for a timeline based on what everyone's findings are in the Watchmen community. So the first clip I'm going to share is from God's Land Down Under.
The thing that I find very, very interesting is this whole process of looking at the feast alignments between 2024 and 2031. We started doing that probably 3 weeks ago, that this feast alignment only occurs between 2024 and 31. So for the rapture to happen next next year in 2025, it had put the feast alignment at the end out. We'd be into 2032, so there'd be 1 year where these feasts weren't lining up nicely, as Brother Matthew at A Billboard for Christ found.
The next clip is from It's Time to Be Unshakable in Christ.
And if you go to the time frames, I'm looking at timelines here. 24th of October, 2,520 days later would be the Feast of Trumpets on 9/18. So why 2,520 days? 1260 plus 1260. The book of Daniel, the book of Revelation. 42 months, 42 months. So that is an exact time frame of the 7-year tribulation from 1024 to 9/18 when the Feast of Trumpets is. Hallelujah.
The next clip is from Cross Heart Ministry.
From Shemini Hatzeret, the last day, on 10/24/2024, the possible rapture day, to Feast of Trumpets, 9/18/2031. It is 2,520 days, which is the length of the tribulation.
So as you see, they're mentioning the same patterns. The next clip is going to be from The Return of the King.
If the tribulation begins this fall, Christ will return in 7 years on Yom Kippur 2031. That's either the 26th or 27th of September, depending on the Jewish calendar being used. On Yom Kippur in 2031, we have a picture-perfect story of the return of Christ. If Christ returns around September 26th, 27th, and 2031, that means the tribulation has to start around November 1st, 2024. The tribulation consists of 2 periods of 1,260 days. Subtracting 2 periods of 1,260 days from Yom Kippur 2031 brings us to Friday, November 1st, 2024. That means the rapture has to occur by this date if the second coming is to be in 2031. Each half of the tribulation is 1,260 days, 3.5 prophetic years. If we subtract 1,260 days from Yom Kippur 2031, the midpoint of the tribulation will occur around the 14th or 15th of April 2028. At the midpoint of the tribulation, which is around April 14th, 2028, we find both Mars and Saturn in the constellation of the dragon in the sea. Both are symbols of the dragon. This is exactly what we should see. It's at the midpoint of the tribulation that the Antichrist desecrates the temple and declares himself to be God.
So now I'm going to showcase actually more information regarding the year 2031 from CJ Lovick's channel. So if you haven't heard or you've seen CJ Lovick's videos, I advise you guys go check them out because his whole channel is very important when it comes down to Bible prophecy. He explains it in a way that I've never seen anyone explain and showcase it before. So in specific, we're going to take a look at this video and this timestamp and this section of this video here, and I'm going to showcase to you what he says and why 2031 could possibly be the year of the second coming. So I'm going to play the clip right from his video here that explains it.
How do I know when the 7,000-year countdown for mankind ends? If we go back to the Bereshit Passover prophecy, we find the answer. The numeric time duration revelation is discovered in the first word in the Bible, the word beginning. That is the last 5 letters in the 6-letter word Bereshit. Tav 400 times Yod 10 equals 4,000. From sin to the crucifixion of Yeshua that happened in 30 AD on the Roman calendar. The Yod 10 times Shin 300 plus 1 equals 3,001 years. Going forward 3,001 years from the cross event of 30 AD takes us to the very important future date on the Roman calendar of 3031 AD. The 7,000-year countdown on God's sabbatical calendar also takes us to the end of the millennial reign of Christ, who returns back to his home in heaven at the end of his 1,000-year reign that ends in 3031 AD. So answer 5. The 7,000-year countdown for mankind ends in 3031 AD, and this is also the time that concludes the 1,000-year reign of Yeshua on the earth. How do I know this? The Bible tells me so. If the 7,000-year countdown ends in the year 3031, then we now have a very important milestone by which we can authoritatively answer a couple more questions. So question number 6, when is the second coming of Christ? The answer is 3031 AD. Going back in time exactly 1,000 years lands us on the year 2031 AD. This is the year of the second coming of Christ that begins the millennial reign of Yeshua. Answer 6. How do I know the second coming of Christ and the start date for the millennium is 2031 AD? The answer is the Bible tells me so. Question 7. Knowing that 2031 is the end of the 70th week of Daniel, we can go back in time exactly 7 years and discover the very year that the 70th week of Daniel begins. So answer 7. The 70th week of Daniel begins in the year 2024 AD. 2024 AD is the year that the 70th week of Daniel begins, ending 7 years later on the Day of Atonement, on a Jubilee year that ends with the second coming of Yeshua in 2031 AD to reign in Jerusalem with a rod of iron for exactly 1,000 years. And so the time of Jacob's trouble ends in 2031 AD. Question number 8. When does the 6,000 years God appointed for man to work come to an end? Going backwards in time, 3,000 years from the conclusion of the 7,000-year sabbatical calendar gives us the date for the beginning of the 5th day on God's 1,000-year for a day calendar, confirming that it begins the year after the crucifixion of Yeshua in 30 AD. It begins in 31 AD. To be clear, the 5th day begins in 31 AD and ends in 1031 AD, and the 6th day begins in 1031 AD and ends in 2031 AD on the Roman calendar. And finally, the 7th day begins in 2031, and on the Roman calendar it ends in 3031 AD. So the answer to question 8, the 6th day that the Lord prophesied would be the 6,000th and final year for man to work, begins in 1031 AD and ends in 2031 AD on the Roman calendar.
And finally, I'm going to showcase the last clip from a billboard from Christ.
For those that are watching October 24th, it seems to be a great time as it's Shemini Atzeret and Simchat Torah. This would align with Noah entering the ark for 7 days before the flood started, which would bring the flood to October 31st, just as we're seeing. For those that think there may be no gap, November 1st is not only the flood date, but it's also the last day that tribulation could start and remain both 20 days in length and end on the Day of Atonement. This will not happen again for at least another 16 years. I say at least 16 years because 2040 is as far as I have looked. Also, November 1st is All Saints' Day. Could this be the day that God brings all of his saints home? November 1st also happens to be the new moon, and it being a Friday, the evening will begin their Sabbath. Let us consider when most people believe that the tribulation will end. Not everyone, but almost everyone agrees that the tribulation ends on the Day of Atonement. This is widely believed to be the day that Jesus himself comes back and physically sets foot on earth again. Again, obviously this could be incorrect, but we are looking at the consensus. So with these two things in mind, we looked to both the past and the future to see how often do these two events happen to be lined up 2,520 days apart. With the Jewish calendar and the way that they keep it, these two things are almost never 2,520 days apart. But it just so happens to be the almost part of almost never, and these two events do line up 2,520 days apart in the years 2024 to 2031. In fact, this is the only year that it does line up. So were the tribulation to start on October 31st / November 1st, depending upon where in the world you live, then several things would be true. It would start on Halloween, which is the flood date, that is most commonly believed to be the date. Second, the 2,520 days of tribulation would end on the Day of Atonement on the Jewish calendar. Now that's already the day that everybody believes, but lining up on the Jewish calendars could be prophetically perfect. The middle of the tribulation in that situation would end on Passover, April 14th, 2028, smack in the middle of Passover. The Jews would flee before their 80th birthday, thus fulfilling the fig tree generation prophecy.
So after saying that, he goes on to mention that in Matthew 24, verse 15 through 21, Jesus Christ says to pray that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day, after they see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in their holy place place. And with the hypothetical timeline of a tribulation from 2024 to 2031, that will land the Abomination of Desolation on April 14th of 2028, which is the middle of Passover right here, as you see. And that would fall on a Sabbath and be during a winter month before Israel's 80th birthday as a nation from 1948. So when Jesus said, pray that your flight may not be in the winter, neither the Sabbath, was he actually saying that this exact day would literally be during the winter and a Sabbath day? Because it seems like it is, based on what we've seen right here, that it is in the Sabbath and during the winter. And Israel's winter is from October to April right there, as you see, October to April, and the summer is from May to September. Psalm 90 talks about Israel as a nation, and verse 10 says, our days may come to 70 years or 80 if our strength endures. Yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away. And if we use May 14th, 1948, which was the proclaimed day of the establishment of the state of Israel right here, May 14th, 1948 to May 14th, 2028, is 80 years. So this verse could relate to Israel being cut off during the Abomination of Desolation and flying away into the wilderness, as Jesus mentioned here in Matthew 24 verse 20, and which is also mentioned here in Revelation 12 verse 6 and Revelation 12 verse 14, where it says that the woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1260 days. And the woman was given the two wings of a great eagle so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the wilderness, where she would be taken care of for a time, times and half a time, out of the serpent's reach, which is 3.5 years or 1260 days. And this could relate to Psalm 90:10, where they fly away, as you see. So Daniel 9:27 says, in the midst of the week, which is in the midst of the 7 years, the Antichrist will put an end to the sacrifices and offerings in the temple and set up an abomination that causes desolation. And I believe the Abomination of Desolation is most likely the image of the beast, who is the Antichrist mentioned here in Revelation chapter 13. So it says, the false prophet deceives them that dwell on the earth by the means of miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast. And he says that they should make an image to the beast, who was the Antichrist, which had the wound by a sword and did live. And the false prophet had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And after that, it says that he brings the mark of the beast on their right hand and forehead, that you can't buy or sell without that. So what is this image of the beast that should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the beast of the image to be killed? What is this image? I believe it's the Abomination of Desolation right here, spoken by Daniel the prophet, which Jesus mentioned here, because it says that it will stand in the holy place. If it's standing, then obviously it must be a type of like statue or something like that. So I think it's most likely a statue of the Antichrist using artificial intelligence, tracking and listening to everyone's movement within the area, because it says that whoever refuses to not worship the image should be killed. So the false prophet sets up this image that can speak and kill people. And that speaking part, at least for right now, sounds very similar to what we've seen with Elon Musk's robots, who can speak and have conversations with people.
You want to get a photo?
Yeah, for sure. Let's do it. Little video.
Can I have a watermelon fogarita? A watermelon?
Yeah.
How am I doing so far?
Killing it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Optimus. Appreciate it.
Of course, anytime.
The Tesla robot, or just any robot or statue that uses any artificial intelligence, may be a precursor to the image of the beast mentioned in Revelation 13 verse 15. So when the Jews see the Abomination of Desolation stand in their holy place, which is most likely the third temple, Jesus said, let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. And he says, pray your flight may not be in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. And as we figured out with the possible timeline here, if it is correct that Passover 2028 is during the winter and the Sabbath, and also it's during the middle of the week. It's the middle of the 10th to 18th, which is the 14th. And what did Daniel 9:27 say? And in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. So while it's meaning in the middle of the 7 years, it could also be referenced to in the middle of the week of Passover, which it does fall perfectly and align perfectly if this is the correct time frame. So let's just hypothetically say that April 14th, 2028 is the Abomination of Desolation, right? If we had 1260 days, that lands us on September 26, 2031. Now this is pretty significant. Adding those days exactly from another feast, it lands on another feast. There are 3 more feasts left for Jesus to fulfill. Jesus already fulfilled the 4 feasts in the spring, and there are 3 left to fulfill in the fall. And if the tribulation does end around this time, Day of Atonement, or even Feast of Trumpets 2031, which is just a week before the Day of Atonement, it will be a fulfillment of all the feasts. Kind of doing more studying and researching on Feast of Trumpets, I believe this is actually the fulfillment of the regathering of Israel. You know, a lot of us would think the Feast of Trumpets would be the day of the fulfillment for the rapture of the church, but looking at it from the perspective of the regathering of Israel as a nation on that day makes a whole lot more sense. Because in Matthew 24, verse 29 to 31, it says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, that Jesus Christ will appear in heaven, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And this is the part that's important that we're probably regards the Feast of Trumpets. It says, he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather his elect from the 4 winds, from one end of heaven to the other. The elect in this verse is the people of Israel. This verse can further showcase that, which it says, and it shall come to pass in that day, the great trumpet shall be blown, and they shall come which were ready to perish in the land of Assyria, and the outcasts in the land of Egypt, and shall worship the Lord in the holy mountain at Jerusalem. Also, this passage in Ezekiel furthermore provides proof that the elect over here in Matthew 24 is actually the people of Israel. So it says that I will seek out my sheep and deliver them out of all places where they have been scattered in the cloudy and dark day. And what do we read in Matthew 24? That in those days, immediately after the tribulation, that the sun will be darkened and the moon shall not give her light. This parallels the cloudy and dark day. And what it says after, again, parallels the other verse in Matthew 24. And this next verse parallels exactly what is said in Matthew 24. And I will bring them out from the people and gather them from the countries and will bring them to their own land, which is Israel, and feed them upon the mountains of Israel by the rivers and in all the inhabited places of the country. And in Matthew 24:31, he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from one end of heaven to the other, as you see. So it's just an exact parallel to this passage in Ezekiel. And I believe what Jesus is describing here, I believe it makes a lot more sense that this happens on Feast of Trumpets, because it's immediately after the tribulation. So rather than a possible rapture of the church happening on Feast of Trumpets, I think it makes more sense for the people of Israel to be gathered on Feast of Trumpets. This whole chart right here showcases the feast of the Lord and the descriptions of each fulfillment on each feast day. This is from Clarence Larkin, which I'll link down below his book where I got this from. I'll link down below the PDF of his book, which is called The Greatest Book on Dispensational Truth in the World, which I'll have a link to it in the description. But when we get to the Feast of Trumpets over here, keep in mind it's also the New Year's Day for the Jews. So it will make sense for the tribulation to possibly end on Feast of Trumpets, because it's the end of the previous year and the beginning of the new year. Also being in the 7th month, this parallels God's 7,000 year timeline for mankind, because during Jesus' second coming, that would be the start of the 7th millennium over here, which is the Sabbath millennium, and the start of day 7, which is the Sabbath day in God's 7,000 year timeline for man. Because remember, there's 6 days of creation, and on the 7th day he rested. It just would overall be a fulfillment of many things on just one day if it does land on Feast of Trumpets, because it will be considered the new year. So during Feast of Trumpets 2031 over here, 7 days after the end of Feast of Trumpets would land on the Day of Atonement in 2031. And 3 days later, after the end of the Day of Atonement, it will actually land us on the Feast of Tabernacles 2031. So it will be a fulfillment of all of these last 3 fall feasts if the tribulation does in fact end on Feast of Trumpets right here. And if we look back to the spring feast where Jesus fulfilled them on the exact days, there wasn't a gap of years with each feast being fulfilled by Jesus. It was only a gap of days being fulfilled within the same year. So all the spring feasts were fulfilled on the same year within days of each other, and there was no 7-year gap or years of a gap, right? But if we say Feast of Trumpets is the rapture of the church, there would be then a 7-year gap to fulfill atonement and tabernacles, right? But the thing is, there wasn't years or a 7-year gap between the spring feast. So if there wasn't a gap of years with the spring feast, then we should apply that to the fall feast, that there shouldn't be a gap with years when he fulfills the fall feast. So that means the fall feast should be all fulfilled within days of each other on the same year, just like the spring feast. And it makes a lot more sense that trumpets would be the regathering of Israel mentioned in Matthew 24. Now, with all of that in mind, here's a mock-up timeline of everything in this video we've gathered together from many people and many Watchmen. So keep in mind, this is a mock-up timeline that is not for certain until time tells. Time will be, of course, the answer to this hypothetical mock-up timeline for all the information that we've gathered together in this video. So if it doesn't come to pass as this hypothetical timeline suggests, then of course we don't take this timeline right here as the literal correct timeline of the next 7 years until 2031. But until time tells, we'll just continue to analyze a time frame of what we've seen and studied and gathered together. And if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. It's okay. At least we've put together what we've seen because we're keeping watch as Jesus Christ instructed us to do. So if there is a possible rapture over here on Shemini Atzeret, right? 20 days from a possible October 24th rapture would actually land exactly on the day of Feast of Trumpets in 2031, which would be the gathering of the elect, which I mentioned earlier. And then, like I said, 7 days later would be the Day of Atonement, September 26, 2031. And if the middle of Passover is indeed this date right here, then we got to add, I think, 1290 days after that or something. I don't really know where to put the 1290 days from the Bible verse that we've given that number from. But 1335 days after, I forgot to mention this actually, 1335 days after the Abomination of Desolation, if it's actually on this day, 1335 days after that day lands actually on Hanukkah 2031. So I don't think that's a coincidence either if this is correct. So yeah, it just seems very convincing that based on what the Bible has given all of us, that it just is pointing to like this whole time frame that many people are watching from 2024 to 2031 with all these feast dates. So we're all putting together this whole puzzle. Like it's just like a billion puzzle pieces scattered across the whole Bible. Like the puzzle pieces are Bible verses, right? Scattered across the whole Bible. But then when you get all the puzzle pieces and you put all these verses together, it'll come together like a perfect puzzle piece, and it'll gather the whole puzzle for you once you gather all the pieces together. So that's how the Bible is, and that's how Bible prophecy is when it comes down to studying it and rightly dividing the word of truth. So again, like I said, if nothing occurs with any of the time frames that are given as a hypothetical, then it's okay, because we're keeping watch, and at least we blow the trumpet to warn people rather than not to warn people if it doesn't occur. But keep having faith, because Jesus Christ is coming very soon. We know that we are in the season, and we have to be prepared and stay ready for his inevitable return. So God bless you.